The white-haired girl gave the guy a bag of coins and asked if this was enough to revive the gigolo. She was very concerned about him, so she sincerely hopes that everything will go well. The guy smiled and said that this was really enough, and after that he gave the girl his hand for a strong handshake and asked her to have fun from the heart. The girl walked forward with a confident step, as she was told that he was at the end of the corridor. Along the way, she thought about her own things, plunging into the world of thoughts and fantasies. The girl slowly closed her eyes and then opened them again. She wondered if she was doing the right thing, but also remembers how she was asked why she shouldn't have a lover. She had already decided to do as she was told and quickened her pace. Louise opens the curtain with a sharp movement of her hand, which greatly frightens the woman standing behind her. She is frightened and asks the guy who is nearby who this girl is, while the guy smiles smugly, because the girl is finally here, and he's tired of waiting for her for so long. Louise stated that she came here only because she was promised the best gigolo in the country. An incredibly pleasant note of confidence was read in her voice. She also thought to herself that let everything be as Laird wanted. Initially, Louise did not intend to do this. She remembers how she recently tried on a luxurious dress and precious jewelry, asking the maid for her opinion whether Laird would like it, and she confirmed that, yes, of course, he would like it. Louise smiled very broadly, happy that she and Laird were together. She ran towards him, holding the edges of the dress with her fingers. She went down the steps, but the maid screamed at her so that the girl was more careful. Louise came closer to the guy and said that she missed him very much, and also asked how things were now at his estate, if everything was okay. Shortly after the wedding, Laird returned after a couple of months at the estate. He smiled, placing his hand directly on his heart, and asked how Louise was feeling. Then he asks the girl to meet the new maid. She is a very beautiful girl with long silver hair and brown eyes, politely greets Louise, but she is slightly embarrassed by such an acquaintance. Deep down in her soul, she felt a little jealousy. The guy grabbed her tightly by the shoulder, and the maid at this time turned to Louise and asked her to take care of her, while Louise continues to wonder what kind of girl he brought and what is the relationship between them. Night has fallen. Bright stars have already begun to appear in the night sky. Louise remembers how Laird explained to her about the maid, saying that on the way to the capital, her luggage was stolen, and she had nowhere to stay, and therefore he offered to live with him for a couple of days. He couldn't leave her to live on the street all alone. Louise thought, maybe she is overthinking herself and exaggerating, but Laird is telling the truth. She remembers the words of the maid, who apologized and said that she was on her way to her mother and younger brother, but ended up here, and added that she would leave their house as soon as she found a place to stay for the night. But the girl even got into this story. The maid reminds Louise of herself in the past. The girl remembers that she then dropped the bucket, which was very horrifying, because she needed to sell all the contents in it today, and if the feathers spoiled, then no one would want to buy. She could already smell the terrible smell from them. Suddenly, a tall and athletic blonde man with noble blue eyes approached Louise. He asked if the girl was okay, after which he began to examine the girl even more carefully, asking if she was okay, and adding that he was ready to pay. Louise thought about the fact that there were difficult times in her life, and Laird is a very understanding person. He simply could not pass by, and since she was in a similar situation, then we need to take care of this girl, especially since she will be leaving soon anyway. Suddenly, Louise cast her gaze towards the path, where she noticed two silhouettes. Taking a closer look, she noticed Laird and a new maid there, sweetly kissing and cuddling each other. This plunged the girl into a state of shock. After a while, she approached Laird for dinner, unable to get the previous thought out of her head. She debates whether it was true or whether it just seemed to her, while the guy asks her what she's thinking about and why she's not eating. Layard smiled politely. He said that he was tired, but Louise loved these dishes, so she should eat them quickly. He behaved as calmly and unperturbed as if nothing had happened. But Louise feigned a smile and said that she would eat. She continued to reflect on recent events. After the meal, the girl went to the exit. She's still as thoughtful. She understands that the guy is as kind to her as he was before. But she definitely saw it all. Or maybe the maid was mistaken in Layard, because from a woman's point of view, everything is different. Out of the corner of her eye, Louise saw in the window how Layard was cuddling up to the maid. And then Louise realized that she had not imagined it all. She ran out into the street very quickly, not understanding how Layard could do this. Was he really tired of her? Louise came closer and asked the guy how he could do this to her. She loved him, and he was doing this to her. But these words only caused Layard to laugh. He said that he also loves her, and loves her more than anyone in the world, but also asked to respect each other's personal space because he wants to enjoy his space himself. Having heard these words, Louise remembered that Layard mentioned freedom and personal space in the marriage contract, but she could not even think that he meant this by these words. And the guy just smiled sweetly, rejoicing that Louise now understood his train of thoughts and desires. The guy took Louise by the hand and reminded her about the marriage contract. He said that according to him, the girl should not interfere in his personal life, otherwise they will get divorced. Louise doesn't really like this move, but she doesn't want to return to her past way of life because she had no other choice. Louise remembers that in the most difficult times for her, Layard gave her a helping hand, and therefore she wants to continue to believe. Louise lowered her gaze. Holding the guy's hand, she agreed with his conditions. And he smiled and said that he was so glad that she understands him. After this day, Layard began to shower Louise with attention. He gave the girl a beautiful bouquet of red roses and said that as soon as he saw them, he remembered her. And Louise thanked her. She was glad that Layard remembered her. What are her favorite flowers? Layard smiled and said that Helena helped him with his choice, and the girl turned to Louise and asked if she was okay, in response to which Louise said that everything was fine. She mentally thought that Layard was now changing women at such a speed that she had lost count. She had simply gotten used to it. Time has passed. Layard turned to Louise and asked her if she was against his mistresses. The girl said that she was not against it, because one way or another they were just mistresses, and she was the wife. And Layard smiled and said that he asked just in case. 3 years have passed since this moment. The maids began to gossip among themselves, discussing the topic of the heir, as well as the fact that the Marquis walks to the left, because while he leads such a lifestyle, there is no heir from his wife, and if an illegitimate child is born, then the mistress may lose power. Louise happily overheard the conversation between 2 maids and began to think about their words, because they were right, and she did not want to lose her enormous power. The girl turned to Layard, asking if it was time for them to have an heir, and the guy said that an heir is not required. But this caused a lot of feelings of misunderstanding on Louise's part, because if everything goes on like this, she will lose her position. The guy said that having children is very difficult. It's a big responsibility, and added that he would like their happiness to last as long as possible. But Louise thought about whether she was really so happy and became a little sad. The guy said that it was time for him, since they were waiting for him, and asked if the girl had any other conversation with him and how urgent and important it was. Louise wanted to say something. She had already started with the words, "We have," but she could not say a single phrase further and said that there was nothing important. And therefore, Layard decided that there were no more questions for him and decided to leave, So how late I was for a meeting. But in fact, today is Louise and Layard's anniversary, but Layard seems to have forgotten about it. And this makes Louise very sad. Time has passed. Louise didn't want to go out anywhere, but in the mansion she felt too lonely. She thought that she would feel better if she went outside, but there her heart only began to ache even more. She came out and suddenly, as if from a bucket, rain poured down, and her dress was completely wet. Louise raised her palm with the inside of it towards the rain and looked at the sky with interest, wondering where such a downpour came from and how often this happens here. She continues to look up sadly and hopelessly, realizing that she shouldn't have gone out. But most of all, she is now worried about her relationship with Layard. She understands that they cannot be saved now. This makes her very worried and sad. The girl remembers how she accidentally overheard Layard's conversation with his friend. He said that his wife had recently caught him with someone else and created such a scandal, while Layard replies that Louise simply cannot object to him. A friend told Layard that when he said that he was getting married, he was even worried about the guy, but he turned out to be not so easy, and the guy just smiled, confirmed his words, and said that he couldn't find a better wife than Louise. And the friend added that he also found someone an unnecessary simpleton for a wife. Louise is unbearable in her soul, but she understands perfectly well that Layard cannot be changed. She thinks about the question of whether she can even find her happiness, while strangers look at her, wondering who this girl is. So Louise wandered around in the pouring rain, completely losing track of time, and only a trembling all over her body brought her to her senses. Louise felt very cold and began to hug herself with her arms, trying to somehow warm up. She looked around and realized that it looked like she had gone far from the city, but even so, she needed to find a place where she could hide from such a merciless rain. Suddenly, she notices a wooden, abandoned house. There is no limit to her happiness. She comes closer to him and boldly opens the door. But as soon as she opens the door, she sees a guy lying on the wooden floor, covered in blood and unconscious. She was simply horrified by this picture, having come to her senses a little. She asked if the gentleman was okay, and he said only quiet sounds. Louise wondered why he was bleeding, but realized that whatever the reason, she needed to quickly give him first aid. First, she decides to examine the wound, but due to the fact that everything is in blood, it is not so easy to find. She takes him by the collar of his shirt and pulls it down a little, examining the guy's collarbone for wounds. But suddenly, he regains consciousness and grabs her hand. He presses firmly on her feminine hand and asks who she is. And Louise is very surprised by all the events that just happened and is slightly scared. Looking at her, he demanded that the girl tell who she was. The man grabbed the girl and his suspicions only intensified. He asks her about who sent her to him. There was no answer. The frightened girl was unable to speak. The young man tirelessly looked into her eyes with a silent question. But he does not have time to find out everything that interests him. His gaze fades, and the man falls, exhausted. He fell right on top of the girl, making her blush from the position in which they both were. A very provocative pose made the girl scream in order to wake up the young man. She tried to push him away with her hands, using all her strength to get rid of the body that was leaning on her. In a room lit by a kerosene lamp, the man gradually comes to his senses. Opening his eyes, he sees a girl with ashen hair in front of him. The young man comments that the color looks familiar. Thoughts gradually return to his still cloudy mind, but he finally wakes up when the girl asks about his condition. Their gazes meet. The man tries to get up, but is stopped by pain in his left shoulder. His injury has already been bandaged. The girl reports that she provided the necessary first aid, and he was lucky that the wound was shallow. The man asks again, and the girl says that it was her doing, but since she didn't have everything she needed, She acted with what she could find. She blushes, remembering that a few moments before, that same man was lying on her like a dead weight. He examines the wound and notes that the girl did a very good job, and the bandage helped a lot. A young man examines a girl. His gaze stops at the hem of her dress. It looks dirty and torn. He understands everything. A man asks a girl if she tied him with her skirt. She replies that she had no choice and assures that the fabric is very clean. But the young man says that the matter is different. The thought that the girl tore her clothes for his sake pleases him very much. He says that she apparently comes from some noble family, but the girl sees the smile on his face and asks, "What's the matter?" She tells him not to laugh, otherwise his wounds will open. The guy thanks the girl for her help. She answers him in the same way, saying that the main thing is that everything is fine with him. After that, she says goodbye and says that it's time for her to leave. The guy is confused. The girl reports that her husband will return very soon, and besides, the rain outside has already stopped. Then the young man rises with effort from his chair and comes closer. He asks her if the girl is interested in what happened to him. She says that anything can happen. The girl adds that today she herself did something that is not at all typical for her and wants it to remain a secret. She intends to end the conversation here. She wishes her companion good luck and turns to leave. Looking after the girl, the man sadly notes that he wanted to trust her with his secret. But now, in addition to everything else, he is interested in the question of who this girl is. Leaving the house, the girl notices that she has a strange feeling of déjà vu, as if she had already met this person. The girl returns home. There her husband finds her and asks what happened to her, because according to the maids, Louise came home wet and in torn clothes. She tries to justify herself by saying that she couldn't carry everything on herself in such a downpour. The husband believes Louise and blames himself for forgetting about the anniversary. The guy sits down next to his beloved's bed and asks how she feels. She says that everything is fine, but notices to herself that her husband smells of women's perfume. The husband informs Louise that tomorrow there will be an important banquet to mark the return of Archduke Lindemann. The girl notices that she completely forgot about it. However, having scrolled through the Archduke's name in her head, Louise realizes with horror that she has already heard it and almost immediately remembers everything. The face of yesterday's stranger appears in front of her, and he turns out to be the same Lindemann, the overthrown heir. A year ago, the Archduke went to Perils, the forest of death, to explore. It was a very dark forest, the darkness of which reigned shortly after the death of the dragon. There were many rumors about what was hidden in that forest. It was rumored that the animals living there could cast magic. The expedition failed. Most of the knights died. After this, all the nobility decided that the emperor had decided to get rid of Lindemann, but the Archduke returned alive sometime later. Moreover, he saved half of his army. Remembering the events of last night, Louise realized that the guy was wounded then. However, her thoughtfulness annoys her husband. He pulls her out of her dreams and asks if she's listening to him. Louise apologizes to her husband for his behavior. Her husband asks her to be careful because there are rumors that Lindemann likes to seduce women in order to then use them to practice black magic. She absent-mindedly agrees, not understanding what kind of rumors they are, and is sure that this does not concern her at all, since they almost never crossed paths and never really talked. However, her confidence is shattered when she and her husband meet the Archduke right at the banquet. A grin appears on the young man's face, and he asks if she is the same Louise. This whole situation is getting on her nerves. The worried husband stands very close, not understanding what to do, and Louise herself, obviously, does not know what is best for her to do. Meanwhile, the celebration continues. The emperor, seated above the guests, welcomes the returning Lindemann. The young man thanks him, but asks why he should immediately hold a banquet on such an occasion. The emperor cheerfully replies that the whole point is that they have come a very long way under his command and with his blessing. The news that the emperor wants to take all the laurels for himself forces Lindemann to be more careful. The emperor casts a pathetic glance at his subordinate and says that the banquet has been arranged very opportunely. But in fact, the ruler is very annoyed that the archduke is safe and sound because he was informed that the young man was seriously injured. Lindemann raises his head after bowing and glares at the emperor, letting him know that his plan did not work. The current emperor is the half-brother of Archduke Eduard Lindemann. Having gained power through deception, he immediately began to take measures to get rid of his brother, who was the legal heir, and sent hired killers to him. However, this did not help the emperor. Edward formed his army and switched from politics to charity and management of his estate. This helped him increase his influence. The growing army recruited from professionals did not suit the emperor's taste. Seeing them as a threat to his power, he sent them on a seemingly suicidal foray into perils. However, half of the army was saved. The failure of his plans only increased the emperor's hatred of his brother, and he still hatched a plan to eliminate Edward. Louise's husband, Count Cloet, was one of those who was the first to congratulate the Archduke on his return. He sincerely expressed surprise that Edward managed to return from the sortie. Louise at that time innocently stood next to her husband without uttering a word. However, when he noticed the girl, Edward was very surprised. He immediately recognized her as yesterday's savior and understood why she seemed so familiar to him. The girl glanced at Edward, which showed that she wanted to keep yesterday's events a secret and not anger her husband again. The Archduke apparently understood what she meant, and when turning to Louise, he simply inquired whether they were the same Countess Louise. The girl nods in the affirmative. She says that she is glad to see Edward and congratulates him on his return. The young man understands that she is pretending to not know him. But the girl's husband suspects something and looks at the Archduke with displeasure. A girl approaches Laird, Louise's husband. This is Liliana. She was recently able to join the ranks of the nobility. The girl comes up to Edward and pays respect to him, saying that she has heard a lot about him. Edward is asked to tell about his expedition. Liliana says that she will be happy to listen to the story. Louise looks distantly and stands nearby. The girl says that she doesn't feel well and asks permission to leave. Laird holds hands with Liliana and asks his wife to be careful. The husband asks if she needs to be accompanied. But seeing how he holds her friend's hand, Louise refuses his help. Then the Archduke enters into the conversation and offers to accompany Louise himself. After which, smiling sarcastically, he adds that he will do this only if Louise doesn't mind. These words caused sincere surprise in Liliana and Louise, and after these words, Laird looked displeasedly in the direction of his wife, waiting for an answer. Trying to prevent the Archduke and Louise from ending up together, Laird, as if jokingly, says that he has never seen Edward accompany anyone, but he says that it coincided and it's time for him too. Louise thanks the young man, but refuses help. These words fill Laird with optimism. Edward did not like the girl's answer very much. He stood still and silently looked after Louise. At this time, at the ball, several people began to find fault with the guest for his appearance, which, according to them, was like that of a tramp. It was the lieutenant of the knights. He asked the two to be calmer, but they did not listen to him and began to provoke him. This only upset the knight even more. Louise approaches the exit, but the lieutenant and two from the palace are standing there. The girl senses something is wrong. It seems to her that a fight is approaching, and she is trying to figure out how to get around them. But when she gets closer to them, she recognizes the guy, saying his name, Maxion. Maxion did not at all expect to meet Louise here and now, and she smiles joyfully. Maxian asks the girl how she even ended up here, and she said that she is married and has been living in the capital for 3 years. And he awkwardly said that he understood everything. The guys, having heard their conversation, were very surprised. They asked with interest if these two knew each other, and Louise replied that yes, they were childhood friends, after which the fair-haired guy wondered why Lady Cloette was friends with such a simpleton. He smiled and remembered that he had heard a story that she was from a poor family. He wondered if this was really true, or if it was just someone's invention. But then I realized that since she was the wife of Count Cloette, there was no reason for hatred. After their thoughts, the guys apologized and bowed to the girl and asked her to have a good time. Otherwise, it even became awkward. Maxian thanks the girl for helping put them in place, while Louise takes his hand, and the guy began to hold her small palm and ask Louise if, before they had seen each other, she had already become Countess Cloette. He smiled and asked how she was feeling, and the girl asked a counter-question, saying that she had heard that Maxian was now a member of the Knightly Order, and even a deputy captain, and the guy confirmed the rumors about himself. And then Louise said that he was great, and this is a commendable achievement. Louise says that Maxian must have also visited Perils. She finds out that the guy went home, and therefore asks him how things are going there. The guy said that everything was fine, and he was very surprised when he didn't find Louise there. And the girl asked if he really looked there, and he began to nod his head in the affirmative. Louise smiled widely, saying that now he can visit her at the estate, and she is sure that her husband will not be against this, and asked the guy to come to her, and Maxian agreed. Louise turned in his direction and asked how he was, but suddenly they heard a voice saying that he had finally found Maxian. It was Edward. He said that he could not find Maxian anywhere, but it turns out he was with Lady Cloette. He turned to the girl and said that he wanted to avoid misunderstandings. He said that he had not initially followed her. He just wanted to find Maxian. Louise turned to Maxian and said that it was time for her to go, and he calmly agreed with this, after which the girl immediately looked back towards Edward. She told the guy that if he moved like that, his wound might open very soon. And then there was a small, awkward pause. Edward smiled and told the girl that she was pretending that they did not know each other, but she was very worried about him. But this did not cause any emotions in Louise. She did not know what to answer to this. Her thoughts were like a tangled ball. She turned to Maxian again and told him that she would wait for news from him, smiling at him very joyfully. And the guy said that it was good. Edward asks Maxian if they are really close friends, and he replies that yes, since childhood. And he also didn't think that his childhood friend would become Layard's wife, and then asks what's going on between them. And Edward, in denial, says nothing, and he just wanted to see her off. And now, it's time for them to go say goodbye to boring people, because society should know about their exploits. Louise turned towards the guys and wondered if he was following her, after which she realized that one way or another, she needed to hurry up. Maxian and Edward are playing a game of chess. Maxian asks Edward if something is bothering him, because from his appearance, you can understand that something is wrong. And the guy answers, saying no. After a few more minutes, Maxian was able to put his opponent in check and checkmate. Edward told the guy that he was playing better and better every time, but it seemed to Maxian that he was deliberately giving in to him, and so he made no progress at all. Edward crossed his arms over his chest and said that it was true. He added a question, asking whether Maxian would be on duty tomorrow, because he heard that he was going to the Cloette estate, and Maxian confirmed this. The guy said that Maxian said that nothing suspicious was noticed about the Countess, and the guy nodded his head, confirming that he didn't notice anything suspicious about her at all. But this answer does not suit Edward. He began to ask Maxian what Louise really is, and asked him to tell him everything he remembers. And Magjan said that this is a difficult question because the last time they saw each other was about 10 years ago. Maxian smiled and said, "Okay." He began to tell, saying that she is very kind and even somewhat similar to Maxian. Louise has not changed at all, and Edward said that it's hard for him to believe that she looks like him, and Maxian said that he will pretend that he didn't hear it. Edward warned the guy not to let his guard down in any case, even if he was glad to meet her, because the Cloet family was quite loyal to the Emperor's circle, and Maxian said, well. Edward told the guy to leave because they would talk again later, and Maxian went to the door, following Edward's wishes. He wondered why Edward was so clingy to Louise and even watching her. What's the matter with him? Does he really suspect her of something or thinks she is capable of a terrible act? All the time when Edward was in perils, the Emperor continued to send assassins to him. The soldiers called for reinforcements to fight back, and on the last day of Edward, the last person close to him betrayed him. It was then that he met Countess Cloet. So the guy wondered if she was in cahoots with the Emperor. Although he understands that he did not notice anything suspicious about her, the Count's wife does not fit into high society at all. She does not look like a noblewoman. She tore her skirt without hesitation, which means this has already happened in her life. But what is such a lady doing with Laird? The guy has so many questions spinning in his head that have no answers. Edward understands that the Imperial gang is up to something, and judging by the Countess's behavior, she recognized him, and also asked him to keep what happened a secret in order to hide his location. These thoughts do not give Edward any peace. He imagined Countess Louise and next to her, Laird, who has not been paying much attention to her lately. He thought about the question of who Louise Cloet is. Night has come. The maid said that she heard that Madame Louise was expecting a guest, and therefore asked the girl how she liked the dress. And Louise smiled, saying that it was magnificent, especially because it reminded her of the good old days. The girl lifted her dress by the edges and began to gracefully go down the stairs to meet her guest. And it turned out to be Maxian. Louise smiled very broadly and began to greet him, very happy that after so much time, they have the opportunity to be together and talk. Maxian holds the horse, and after Louise's words, he turns to her and just as joyfully greets his childhood friend, thanks her for the invitation, saying he couldn't help but come since she called him, because he really appreciates the fact that she invited him. The smile never leaves Louise's face. She says that she is very happy that the guy has arrived and she can see him. She still wants to tell Maxian so many things, and therefore invites her friend to go inside the building, after which they both go forward, entering inside. Louise invited Maxian to the table, and he was very happy to see a very beautiful and elegant piece of apple pie in front of him. Louise said that she didn't know what he liked to eat now, so she remembered the good old days, or rather, their childhood, and asked if he liked it. Now it's apple pies, and the guy nodded affirmatively. Maxian bites a small piece of pie, and then again, it's incredibly tasty. And Louise says that she is very glad that Maxian appreciated her hospitality and liked the food. She also added that the guy was so stretched out, and his character was still the same as in childhood. Maxian asked not to make fun of him, and Louise just laughed and asked him to eat as much as he could. And if anything, he could ask for more. There are many different treats on the table, also beautiful, and at the same time exquisite. The girl simultaneously asks Maxian how he got into the knightly order, because she would be interested in hearing the whole story of her childhood friend's journey. Maxian said that on the way back, he accidentally came across the estate of the Archduke, and fortunately, he accepted him into his ranks. And Louise said that now everything is clear to her. The girl took a cup of fresh hot tea and said that Maxian now looks very happy, and much happier than before, and she is very glad that the guy is doing well. Maxian laughed and said that he was happy then too. So don't let him think that he's just so much happier than before. After which, Maxian turns to her friend and asks how she feels and how she is doing, and adds her husband to the conversation, asking if she gets along with him. But Louise felt uneasy from such questions. She was very embarrassed. She remembered everything that she and Layard had, remembering his mistresses, and the fact that he dared to forget even their anniversary. So she had to fake a smile and say, yes, they get along and everything is fine. Although this is not at all true. Sweat continues to flow down her face, and she turns slightly pale. Deceiving her friend, she says that of course they get along and adds that she is lucky to have met a man worthy of her. Maxian said, "It's good that Count Layard is a decent person," but Louise agreed. But to herself, I understood that this was not true. She decided to change the topic, since this was not pleasant to her at all. She invited the guy to go for a walk, adding that they have a very beautiful garden, and she wants to show her friend everything. And Maxian agrees. They get up together and head towards the garden. Maxian asks what they will do if it suddenly starts raining, and Louise says that even if so, she thinks that it won't rain for long. And what if they take shelter somewhere? While talking about this, they didn't notice how they increased the pace walking. Maxian smiled and said, turning to Louise, that she always knew how to predict the weather well. And the girl smiled widely, clapping her hands. She really knew that it would rain, but she still decided to walk, because the strange atmosphere did not give her any peace. It started to rain. Maxian opened the umbrella and placed it under himself and Louise, but she can't open hers, and asks the guy what's wrong with the umbrella, and Maxian said that he thinks the umbrella is broken, and Louise asks if he's really saying this with a hint of sarcasm, since she herself sees that the umbrella is broken. But at the same time, she has the idea that maybe they will fit under one umbrella. She thanks the guy for hiding her from the rain in such cold weather, but the rain is only getting stronger and does not plan to stop for a second. Suddenly, Louise touched Maxian's hand, looked him straight in the eyes, and then pointed her finger to a place where they could hide from such heavy rain. The guy understood her, and together they decided to quickly get there. They ran as fast as they could. They finally reached the gazebo and caught their breath. Maxian folded his umbrella. Since there is no need for it now, the rain began to pour even harder. But this no longer concerns them. But Louise says that she feels like in childhood, remembering how they spent time together for the good old days. Afterwards, Louise drew attention to the guy's clothes. They were all wet and dirty, and she apologized, believing that it was her fault, and Maxian said that these were small things, and she had nothing to apologize for, added that he was glad to be here, because this has its own special charm. Later, Maxian looks at Louise and asks a question that has interested him for a long time. He decided to find out if Mr. Grimm is also in the capital, but it's a little difficult for the girl to answer this question. But she pulled herself together and told her friend that he had died. And Maxian was shocked with this answer and asks, "When did this happen?" Louise said that this happened 5 years ago, but Maxian feels guilty and says that he should have stayed. But Louise calms him down, putting her hand on his shoulder, saying that he had no choice. And now the most important thing is that they were able to meet. Maxian is sad. He says that it must have been very difficult for Louise to come to terms with this and live with these thoughts. The girl said that it was really difficult for her, but even so, she added that as long as she has Layard, then everything is fine with her, knowing that Layard is not the best man, but just her wild husband. Maxian looks carefully at Louise, seeing the sadness on her face. He is worried about his friend, and she tells him that when she escaped, she thought that she had gotten out of the cage, but ended up in another cage, only more beautiful. Louise says it's very difficult for her now, and the worst thing is that only she can fix it. The girl tries to say it, barely holding back her accumulated tears. But Maxion says her name, but he still doesn't fully understand how he can even support or help her if she herself said that only she can solve her problems. At this time, Edward approaches the carriage. They ask him where he wants to go, and he said to the Cloet estate. And since they are close friends, it means he is unlikely to be careful. The guy decided to see this personally. He firmly and decisively decided to take Maxion from there. Time has passed. Louise sees Maxion off on his way. She asks him to be careful, and he agrees, saying that they had a good time together, and also adds that if something happens to Louise, he should definitely send him news, and Louise agrees, saying that of course he will be notified if something goes wrong. Suddenly, Louise hears a voice so painfully familiar to her. They both turn and see Layard in front of them, who turns to Louise and says that he didn't think that her childhood friend was such a strong man. He smiles, examining Maxion very carefully. Louise smiles broadly, greeting her husband, but he doesn't evoke such joyful emotions in Maxion. The girl invites the guys to introduce them. She introduces Maxion to her husband, saying that this is her childhood friend, after which the guys looked at each other and started the conversation. First, Maxion. He said that he was glad to meet you. He was about to leave, but he was lucky enough to meet the Count. But Layard said that he was sorry that the guy was already leaving, and suggested that Maxion have dinner together next time. This conversation was accompanied by a strong man's handshake between Layard and Maxion. But Maxion was somehow not particularly happy about their meeting, so he didn't show any special emotions of joy, and didn't even smile. After which he said that it was time for him to go, and Louise said that it was great and said goodbye to her old friend. Layard turned to Louise and asked if they were waiting for someone else, and the girl said no. But Layard is embarrassed that some carriage is rushing towards them. After a moment, when the carriage stops next to them, a familiar silhouette of a guy comes out of it. This is Edward. Everyone is very surprised, since they were not expecting him at all. Edward turns to Maxion, saying that he came for him, and everyone was even more surprised when they heard this. Edward explains that he was worried that it would rain again, and just happened to be nearby, and therefore decided to take a carriage for Maxion. He explains all this to Louise, adding that it is not good to ride around on horseback in such weather. Louise said that she understood, but she thought to herself that rain is not expected today, and this is clear to anyone, and therefore she realized that Edward was lying to her so openly. She hoped that Edward would leave as soon as possible. She knows that if the details of that day are revealed, Layard will be angry. After this, Edward suddenly turned to Louise, saying that on the way here he noticed a very beautiful garden, and added that he hoped that someday the girl would invite him there and show her all the beauty of their estate. But suddenly, Count Layard intervenes in the conversation, standing between Louise and Edward. He says that they live quite modestly, and albeit not so luxuriously, but they will try to find a corner for Edward. And the guy smiled, said that he would wait impatiently, and wished goodnight Layard. And he wished him in return. Time has passed. Louise and Layard are sitting together at the same table. Layard turns to Louise, calling her his, and asks how she thinks she should hang out with such dishonest people. And Louise asks what he means by the word dishonest, adding that Maxion is her old friend. Layard says it's not just him and asks why Archduke Lindemann came. Layard adds that he doesn't know how they met, but he is a traveling commoner, and Louise is now a countess. Louise thought to herself that Layard himself takes commoners to his place, and she used to be like that herself. She feels bad. She doesn't understand what these strange restrictions are. But Layard repeats himself, saying that now she is Countess Cloet, so she can forget her maiden name, because he doesn't want people to avoid her. After which he asked her not to tell anyone about her origin. But Louise is sad, She understands that Laird is ashamed of her past, but at the same time is not even interested in what she wants. Now, she feels that this is dishonest, and therefore says that Maxion is the only friend. She notices the threatening appearance of Laird, who seems to force the girl to obey her with his whole appearance. Otherwise, if she disobeys, she may even lose her title, which is important to her, since she does not want to return to her past life. So Louise has no choice but just take it and accept it. Louise sadly lowers her gaze, saying that since Laird doesn't like him so much, she will try very hard to stay away from him. And the guy touched Louise's palm and said that if Maxion were just her lover, he wouldn't have said anything. After that, Laird smiled, because he had an amazing idea. He suggested that Louise take a lover if she was very bored, while speaking without sarcasm, but quite frankly, adding to this the fact that she needs to relax somehow. But this shocks Louise extremely. She doesn't understand how Laird can talk about it so calmly, but at the same time, she understands that if she starts arguing with him, they might quarrel, and she really wouldn't want that. She just wants to calm down now after Heard. She does not want to destroy the general peace with her own hands, but Louise, for some reason, decided to agree. She looked at her husband and said that she would take a lover. Besides, he himself proposes it, and, judging by this, he is not at all against it. But on the contrary, he even wants it. The guys are sitting in armchairs. Maxion is very shocked by what he just read about the life of his friend and her husband. It seems strange to him that her friend's husband suggested she have a lover. But Edward asked what she answered him, and Maxion said she asked where to find a lover. Louise clarified whether the best solution would be to take a closer look at the gigolo, but Maxion cannot help her with this in any way. But it's even difficult for Edward to imagine Louise together with the gigolo. Her thoughts are dispelled by Maxion, asking maybe Edward can come up with an answer because he doesn't know what she wants answer. And he asks what the guy is going to answer her. Maxion said that he wants to say that he is confused. He would like to advise her not to listen to her husband, but he can't meddle in their personal affairs. Edward said that he is reasoning correctly, after which Maxion adds that be that as it may, he is worried about his friend, but she will go there all alone. But suddenly his monologue is interrupted by Edward, offering his candidacy for that. To become the lover of Countess Cloet, in his voice you can hear a very wide range of confidence and also a certain curiosity. And this surprises Maxion very much. He does not understand why Edward needs this. Did the guy really like his girlfriend? A letter was sent to Louise, and now she received it. She began to read, seeing the text that this news took her friend by surprise, and he thought for a very long time what to advise her. In this case, Maxion knows one man who is ideal for Louise. He asks if the girl wants to meet him. Before writing this in a letter, Maxion asked Edward why he needed this. Maybe he liked the Countess, and he said that everything was simple, and in fact, he was just very bored now. Maxion is very surprised by this answer, and therefore asks again. Edward explains that after returning from perils, he did all the work on the estate. Besides, he was still going to keep an eye on the Cloet family. He wonders who this Countess Cloet is, and now Maxion realized that he mostly needed it for surveillance. Maxion says that it could be dangerous, especially if he becomes her lover and starts surveillance. And he himself should understand this perfectly well. But Edward answers in a very calm tone that he will just be careful. But Maxion asks if the guy has already forgotten about that wound, and Edward denies that he simply didn't know that a person close to him would betray him. Maxion added that Edward knew about this, but still left. But at the same time, he lowered his gaze, realizing that then he himself had poorly fulfilled his knightly duty. Among his subordinates was a young man whose younger sister ended up in the Imperial Hospital, but he defended His Highness to the very end. and His Highness specifically left the residence to avoid being escorted. He deliberately carried out an attack and stained the sword with blood himself because he knew that then his sister would be safe. But how did he even manage to fight back in such a state? The guy thought. He should have immediately taught that traitor a lesson. Edward asks Maxion if he is really that unreliable, and the guy replies that that's not the point. And therefore Edward asked to write a letter, arguing that he is much better than an incomprehensible gigolo. And after that, Maxion began to write down the letter. Maxion, at Edward's prompting, suggested that Louise go to the Dolores Motel, because the best gigolo was there, and the girl would definitely like him. Louise holds in her hands the sheet that Maxion wrote to her. She reads about the name of the gigolo Elysian after she has completely read the text. The girl is interested in where Maxion has such deep knowledge. How does he even know about all this? She throws the piece of paper into the fire, thinking that, for example, she wasn't interested in women before, or maybe he's even gay. But if so, then she'll wait until he admits it himself. After all, they're close friends, and he can talk about it. Tell her calmly. The girl is warming herself by the fire, wondering if she will be able to have a lover. She is still thinking about how such an idea could even come to Layard's head, and does he really care that she might have a lover? Time has passed. Edward understands that Louise hasn't come to him today. He doesn't understand why he's doing all this. If she doesn't come at all, the guy crossed his arms over his chest, not at all understanding why Louise is so frivolous. He thought about the fact that he first heard about Countess Cloette 3 years ago. He heard a rumor that Count Layard was married, and he married her then. The Countess is very beautiful, but no one knew what family she was from, since it was the first time she was seen. The girl took pasta from the table and began to eat, although it was very ridiculous and did not coincide with the norms of high society. So rumors immediately began to spread about her non-aristocratic behavior. And then Edward realized that she was not of noble origin, and she was a very interesting person for secular circles. The food at the banquet was just decoration. People were amazed at the complete lack of manners. But for Edward, it seemed funny. He even became interested, thinking that this girl was not like everyone else. She was unique in her own way. But interest quickly disappeared when he saw how she always stands in the shadows and runs away somewhere. Not only does she not fit into social circles, she is also quite boring. So many years have passed that Edward has already forgotten about her, and now he cannot believe what awaits her in the motel. He thinks that life is a funny thing. The guy put on a mask and thought about what he would do if she didn't come today. But then a girl with bright hair approached the guy and asked His Excellency if he could pour him more tea, and he agreed. The girl looked at his unusual mask, thinking to herself that it seemed like he really liked strange and unusual games. And the guy realized that judging by her facial expression, new rumors about him would soon appear. There were always many different rumors around Edward. He never got involved in love scandals, but society was stirred up by the fact that he returned alive from the forest of death. They say that he owns black magic, and there are also rumors that he is afraid of women, and that he has strange preferences in bed. He was always respected, but there were strange rumors. This time, the guy put on a mask and stayed in the motel for several days, so he understands that soon all sorts of conversations will start about him. But this will only benefit him, because it will distract the Emperor's close associates. The guy smiled, realizing that he will remain in the black. Suddenly, they hear the sound of footsteps and realize, along with the red-haired girl, that someone has come. The guy recognizes in this girl the same countess whom he has been waiting for here for so long. The girl greeted him here and stated that she was told that the best gigolo in the country would be here. The red-haired girl was very surprised, and the guy said that everything is fine, and let her go about her business. He decided to do a little trick and try to change his voice. Edward got out of bed and asked the girl if she was Countess Cloette, adding to this the question of what brought her to him. Did she really catch her husband cheating? And maybe the nights with him had bored her, and added that if he guessed right, then she came to the right place. Louise was very shocked by this. She even blushed from a little embarrassment. And when she came to her senses a little, she said that she just wanted to have a lover. And the guy said that it was quite strange that she was not interested in his body, and asked what the benefits were for him personally from this proposal. And Louise said that he would heal so well that he would not have to accept other guests. But Edward said that this was not enough. He approached the Countess closer, and she looked at him and began to think that he seemed familiar to her. She offered the guy everything whatever he wants. He smiled and said that he accepted her offer, and after that, he took off his mask. So now Louise realized that it was the Archduke, and this shocked her very much. The girl apologized for the rudeness. She realized that Maxian brought her here on purpose. She just can't believe whether they really planned all this on purpose from the very beginning. Louise was about to leave, but the Archduke stopped her, saying that she shouldn't leave, because the most interesting thing would soon begin, and she couldn't miss it. The guy pressed himself close to Louise from behind, and she said that he would not have so much fun soon, and now he would be incredibly bored. And he pressed closer to him and whispered in his ear that he didn't even think that the lady liked to hang out in brothels. But Louise denies, saying that she is here for only one reason: to find a lover. And then Edward said understandingly, saying that he understands her very well. He smiled and said that he would become a lover for Countess Louise de Cloette, then asked what she was all about thinks about this. The girl said that she didn't come here to joke. Edward replied that he wasn't there for that either, after which Louise and Edward looked at each other for some time. Louise even managed to blush from such a close look. Louise finally made up her mind. She extended her hand to the guy and invited him to become her lover, and he smiled, saying that this was an excellent decision of the Countess. He took her hand and kissed her, saying that as long as he was her lover, he would do everything for her. Time has passed. Louise even managed to go for a walk, but she still can't calm down and can't understand why she did this. Why she offered the role of her lover to Edward. Now she has such a strange feeling. She understands that Layard himself advised her to do this. But even so, the feeling that she is doing wrong does not leave her. It still seems to her that she is cheating. Louise even blushed from such thoughts. Suddenly, she met Layard's gaze and realized that he was still awake. And the guy said that today was a great evening and such a beautiful moon. He smiles looking at his wife and raises his glass, inviting the girl to drink with him. Louise looks at the guy. She thought that she once fell in love with his smile, and once Layard saved her life. But why can't we turn back time? But her thoughts are destroyed by Layard, asking why Louise doesn't answer to him. Louise turned to Layard. She was about to tell him about her mistress, but then she remembered his recent words that if she interfered in his personal life, they would get divorced. So she decided to tell the guy to forget, because she just wanted to take a walk by estate. And the guy smiled and said that this was a great idea, and asked the girl to be careful, since it was already dark. And Louise agreed with him. She hopes it will be better for everyone, so she wishes the guy good night, and he, smiling, wishes his wife the same. Morning has come. The girl approached her lover and gave him a contract. He asked why it was needed while looking at the sheets. But Louise said she doesn't know what she needs a lover for and what she should do with him, and therefore considers it necessary to write everything carefully. She adds that, for example, she wouldn't want them to act like a married couple, and the guy agreed, adding that if she changes her mind, she should let her know. but Louise is sure that this will not happen. Edward said that the girl should know that usually all issues between lovers are resolved not through contracts, but through negotiations. But Louise denies everything, saying that they are not lovers. And then Edward sarcastically asks who they are then. Louise explains that lovers are unscrupulous people who cheat on their partners, but mistakenly believe that they are ideal lovers. The guy agreed with these words and asked Louise if she knew about this when she offered him this. The girl replies that she knew everything, but they are not real lovers. She also adds that she also entered into a contract with her husband. The guy said that he didn't know that contracts were so popular these days, but also added that, be that as it may, he would clearly be more useful than some gigolo. The guy smiled, put his hand in his hair, and said that he was not just a lover. He was the most famous person in the capital, Eduard von Lindemann. Louise did not appreciate such boasting, and then asked why she was so interesting to him, and he easily said that he just likes to frolic. Besides, he had enough money. He was the heir, and was already tired of female attention. Edward also added that the Countess could speak openly about her desires, because he would turn out to be that chess piece, and the girl agreed. The guy added that if Louise wants to think about everything, then he understands he will give her time. And while he reads the paper that she brought him, Edward immediately became interested in what kind of documents they were. All the papers were almost the same. The difference was only in a few points. Edward noticed a point where it was written that if he sympathizes with another person, the relationship will be completed. This made him think. He said that he doesn't think that the girl is really looking for love, since this phrase is repeated very often, but she said that it's really not that much wanted. Louise told the truth, that she was advised to find a lover by her own husband, and Edward said that he understood this, thinking to himself that Countess Cloette is a very strong woman, and asking her maybe there were other reasons. The Countess said that she would like her husband to understand her feelings, after which Edward asked if she wanted the Count to feel like he was in her place, and she said yes in the affirmative. She tightly squeezed her feminine palms and said that, as her mother said, "You need not only to wish for victory, but also to fight bravely," and said that she really hopes that the Count will help her in this battle. And the guy smiled. The guy says that this week there will be a banquet at the Heliod family, and Liliana de Heliod is a rising star in social circles. And recently she became the Count's new mistress and asks if the girl agrees to start the first battle. And she very confidently says yes. Edward then suggests starting small. He extends his hand to Louise and asks if they shouldn't fall in love with each other. Edward, smiling, suddenly asked Miss Louise if they should not fall in love with each other. At that moment, an unexpected heavy atmosphere hung in the air, as if they were in some kind of romantic scene. Louise, unperturbed, rejected Edward's proposal. She said that of course not, since she was never going to fall in love with the Archduke. There was clear determination, and no doubt in her answer. Following this, Louise, without stopping, decided to find out why Edward so calmly calls her by name. Edward, feeling upset, could not hide his emotions. His face showed disappointment because Louise answered him so forcefully. Louise asked Edward to stop teasing her, even if the guy pursues his own interests. For Louise, this is all very serious. Edward apologized. He said that he meant that in the hall they would need to play a loving couple. Louise, perplexed and uncertain, did not know what to do in this situation. She became afraid that others might think that she was really in love. Edward, trying to diffuse the tense situation, suggested that they come up with something and asked Louise if she had any ideas. Louise, feeling Edward's gaze on her, leaned over and whispered her idea, which she had seen in novels. The guy listened to her attentively. His gaze reflected interest and readiness to bring the proposed idea to life. Edward, having heard Louise's idea, expressed confidence that this would be more than enough. Despite his confidence, Louise still had doubts about how successful their game would be. Laughed and said that Miss Louise was faster than he thought. He asked her if she was always so active. Louise frowned, and Edward quickly apologized for his words. Then he smiled and said that it wouldn't hurt to practice in front of the mirror a couple of times. Confused, Louise nodded in response with mixed feelings. Rising from her chair, she briefly said goodbye and left the room. Edward, when the door closed, leaned on his arm and noted with a smile that Louise was a funny girl. There was a hint of respect in his voice for her character and unpredictability. Suddenly there was a knock on the door. Edward allowed entry, and the door swung open. Maxion entered the room. Edward greeted Maxion politely and said that he was just about to ask him a couple of questions. Maxion, ready to answer, expected new questions. However, Edward brushed aside his idea and suggested that Maxion first tell him why he had come. Maxion reported that movement had been noticed on the Emperor's side, and they were probably preparing for a fencing competition. Edward, puzzled by this information, asked again, trying to understand the essence of what was happening. Maxion added that his master said that he would definitely invite Edward, who showed himself well last time. Maxion believes that this is just an excuse to evaluate Edward's skills. Edward sighed heavily. He said they had just returned from perils, and he hadn't even had a rest. Edward believes that the Emperor's intentions are obvious, but probably intends to force Edward to leave the capital or wants to harm him. Edward said that he was very tired and it was high time to kill him, but he believes that it will not be easy. Maxion explained that knights from noble families flock from all over the empire, and they say that the one who manages to come out of the battle alive wins. Hearing this, Edward got scared and decided to refrain from attending the event. But at that moment, Maxion added that the winner will receive Lencia's sword. This interested Edward. He asked Maxion what he was talking about. Was it really the same Lencia sword from legends and fairy tales? Maxion said yes, because the Emperor was going to personally present it to the winner, which made the event even more attractive. Edward smiled and said that his half-brother had lost his mind and was now giving away the imperial treasures so easily. Maxion suggested that Edward prepare for special training. Edward agreed, because he cannot just sit and watch the treasure flow into the wrong hands. Edward doubted whether he would find a suitable teacher in the capital. He believed that Maxion was not skilled enough, to which the guy said that there is a better person in the capital than him. Edward was greatly surprised, but then Maxion added that he had never managed to defeat this man. Edward believes that Maxion achieved his position solely through his own efforts. But if this person is stronger than Maxion, then it would be wonderful to attract him to his side, because Edward would still need such a person. Edward said that he was glad to hear this and asked to introduce them after the banquet. Maxion bowed respectfully and assured that he would definitely introduce them, after which he headed towards the exit, preparing to leave the room. However, remembering Louise, Edward stopped Maxion. He asked if Miss Louise had any unusual preferences. Edward shared with Maxine that today Miss Louise told him that she would never fall in love. Maxion decided that this was a completely adequate reaction to events. Edward expressed his surprise, considering this behavior strange. It was a surprise for him to encounter a girl who was ready to categorically refuse. Maxion looked at Edward with some surprise and silently wished Louise all the best with Edward. Louise is riding in a carriage with her husband Laird. At this moment, there was some awkwardness in the air. After visiting the Archduke's estate near Laird, Louise began to feel even more awkward. Laird asked Louise why she was drooping, and maybe something was wrong. Louise believes that, judging by his behavior, he does not even realize that she saw His Highness. Laird reminded Louise that they had arrived at the Heliod estate. This word brought Louise back to reality, and she resolutely prepared to leave the carriage. Laird and Louise entered the Heliad family mansion arm in arm. Here they were met by a girl with red hair. She greeted Laird with a smile. The girl says that she is very glad that he accepted her invitation. Laird asked the girl why she was so serious. The girl smiled and said that while she was preparing for the banquet, she kept thinking about Laird. After a short pause, she added that she was very glad to see him. At that moment, Laird turned around and addressed Louise, saying that he would go say hello to his friends. After which, Laird added that if Louise was tired, she could go home. The guy smiled and took the red-haired girl by the arm. Louise looked at her husband with downcast eyes and said that she was going to enjoy the banquet today. Laird was surprised by her words, but wished a good evening to his wife, after which he and the red-haired girl left. At that moment, Louise heard someone in the crowd discussing her. They say that they were surprised that Louise came here. They can't imagine how Louise came up with the idea of appearing at the banquet of her husband's mistress. People think that Madame Cloette has no self-esteem at all and wonder how she even lives. Louise decided that this Heliad family banquet would be her first fight, and this was just the beginning. At that moment, Edward approached her. The guy, with a smile on his face, said that Louise's husband quickly ran away. He then invited Louise to drink a glass of wine, handing it to her. Louise accepted the glass and took a small sip. Edward asked if Louise had been training. The girl replied that she tried. Edward smiled and offered to begin implementing the plan. Louise still doubted whether they would succeed. Edward asked Louise not to worry because she was next to him and said that now is the time. Louise got ready. The girl began to gradually loosen the hand in which she was holding the glass. When it completely left her hand, fell, and broke, Louise screamed. Edward came up to her, took her hand, hugged her, and asked if she was okay. This scene caused confusion among Laird. The guy looks at Louise with loving eyes and asks if she's okay. She plays along with him and looks at him like that, calling the guy his excellency. Edward said that fortunately the girl was not injured and suggested that she leave from here because it is dangerous here, and Louise thanked the gentleman for worrying about her. Louise, in a quiet voice, asks the guy if she is playing everything too pretentiously, and he asked her not to worry because she is doing great, and he thinks that everyone believes in it. He asks if the girl feels that right now everything is on them, look and build their theories and gossip. The guy said in a whisper that all eyes are directed at the two of them, and therefore they need to prepare. He looked at the girl and asked if she was ready, and she nodded firmly and decisively. The guy began to continue this performance. He bent over in front of the girl, kissing her feminine hand, inviting his beloved to the first dance. This causes a storm of emotions among the guests. Even Laird himself, along with his mistress, watched this picture. Behind the backs of Louise and Edward, they began to spread various rumors about them. Louise smiled and accepted Edward's offer, decided to dance the first dance with him, and everyone continued to look at them. Only Laird was not very happy about this. He also heard gossip that these two spent a lot of time together at the last banquet, and this even made Laird angry. But he tries to keep his calm face. The guests are discussing that this is very exciting, but they could not even think that they would find such an intriguing scene. Louise is very interested in what rumors about them will spread the day after tomorrow. She dances with Edward, while very close to them, Laird dances with his mistress, Louise turns to the guy and tells him that she feels like some kind of buffoon. And the guy says in a quiet voice that the girl should enjoy the moment, because when will she ever be able to dance in front of such a crowd? And she just noticed that Edward is not at all excited, and he explained that, as he already said, he just likes to frolic. The guy says that it is necessary to properly entertain the crowd because everyone understands why the first dance is to such music, and Louise asks what it is for, and then Edward emphasizes the point that she is very close to him. In fact, like everyone who dances is close. Louise looked away, noticing the dances of other people. She noticed a certain atmosphere that reigned between everyone. Edward noticed that Louise looked back and asked her not to look back at the other couples and look him straight in the eyes. Otherwise, it would seem that the girl in need of help was less sincere than her savior. The guy squeezes her waist tighter, gently touches her hands, which makes Louise blush more, but says that she understands everything that Edward said earlier. She is even more confused by the fact that the guy is so close that she can feel his breath. Louise blushed more. She admitted that she was not yet comfortable with Edward, and it was hard to look him straight in the eyes for so long, and then asked if the guy was uncomfortable with her. Edward replies that he is also embarrassed, and then Louise notices that he behaves very confidently when he looks her straight in the eyes, and the guy said that this does not mean that he is comfortable, and added that there are many reasons to feel uncomfortable. Edward asked if the girl wanted him to tell one funny thing that might seem interesting to her. Louise agreed and learned from the guy's words that the Count reacted very strangely to all this. Besides, he constantly glances at them, and it is quite natural that this Edward is not particularly comfortable. The girl wondered if Laird was jealous of her. This surprised her very much, since he himself offered her such an adventure as having a lover. The music has stopped, but Edward asks the girl to continue dancing, because it's customary to play the dance to the end. Time has passed. Night has come. Laird's mistress asks him to wait, but he walks quickly forward without paying any attention to her. The only thing he thinks about is his wife and the Archduke. He does not understand what the Archduke did with Louise, but it worries him greatly. Immediately after the dance, the mistress turned to Laird and told him to confirm that the music was really great. And he laughed, saying that it really was so. But suddenly he saw the silhouette of his wife with Edward. He saw the girl smiling at the Archduke, and the first question that came to his mind was, where did Louise go with this idiot? Laird thinks that the Archduke did something to her wife, because she is not one of those who behave like that. He is very worried and goes to meet her. He does not pay attention to his mistress at all and looks up, seeing acquaintances there, silhouettes. Laird noticed how Edward hugs his wife and kisses her forehead, but this greatly shocks him. He is very angry with the Archduke and can barely restrain his emotions. Liliana turned to Laird, asking what was wrong with him, and he said that he couldn't do this anymore because he was looking forward to the night with her, after which he kisses the girl tenderly. But he looks away and looks at Louise, who is standing nearby with the Archduke and is interested in what his wife is thinking about. Edward turns to the Countess, saying that if you look from below, it will seem as if they are very close, and the girl blushed deeper with the thought that this is true. She smells the roses that come from Edward. She thinks maybe it's the smell of high-quality oils, but be that as it may, it's a very familiar aroma to her. She remembers that all the smells in Perils were terrible, and after which she thought that she was thinking about the wrong things, raises her head to the guy and asks him how Laird reacted and whether he will change his attitude towards her. Edward looked away from the girl and said that judging by the look on the guy's face, everything went well as they had planned. After which the guy looked at Laird, who was kissing his mistress, and realized that he did not understand Laird at all. Was he really behaving this way in front of his wife on purpose? Edward cannot believe that Madame Louise hopes for such a person,